Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where I help you understand Waldorf-inspired homeschooling. We address topics like what is a main lesson block, what is a main lesson, what are opening activities, and today's lesson is how do I actually homeschool with a rhythm that works with my family and a routine that works well with my children. So today we're going to talk about how to actually lay out your homeschool day. And this is loosely Waldorf inspired and more practically inspired because your family is unique and you have times when you are ready to do the homeschool and other times when you're ready to do other things. So working within a homeschool environment versus a classroom environment when you're doing a Waldorf approach to your homeschool is going to be very different because sometimes we have other obligations on our time and it might be difficult to have a regular schedule for your homeschooling lessons when you have a baby, when you have a toddler, when you have other students who are not homeschooling and you're getting them to other classes, or you have extracurricular activities throughout the day, or you have meals that you're prepping for, or you have chores, or you have errands. So there are a lot of other things that complicate having this ideal homeschool day. But I want to tell you about a couple of things that help me achieving our homeschool goals, and also it takes a little bit of observation as well. Ideally, in my mind, I think it's amazing if we start at 8 a.m. That just doesn't work for our family as much as I tried to do that in some years. Part of the reason why it doesn't work is that usually we want a little more time to get ourselves into a space of learning in the morning. And this might be because we do a little bit more time for our meals. So cooking and eating, it's a big deal in our family. And we tend to do our main meal for lunch, and definitely breakfast is a really important meal of the day. So we do spend a lot of time with breakfast, and usually we're cooking those meals. And so they're not usually things that are really quick and potentially easy, but maybe not always healthy to start the day and then just dive into a homeschool lesson. So since we prioritize cooked meals, which that is a personal family value, and that may not be your value. So I don't want to say that that is something that you should prioritize because every family is unique when it comes to their dietary needs and what they want to spend their time on. But since we like to focus on cooking at home and having our meals, it does take a little bit more time, which means that our start of the day for our homeschool is definitely not going to be 8 a.m. for most of the year. On occasion, that's completely possible, but for the most part, that's not going to work because of some of the values that we have. Something else that we should pay attention to is the growing of our children. Their growth development also plays a part in how early they're ready to start their learning and to start school. So I found that while my younger than 5-year-olds would wake up at the crack of dawn, the moment my first child turned around 5, I noticed that he was sleeping more in the morning. And I thought, well, this is ironic. We're ready to start school. You're old enough to do official school. And here you are sleeping in. You'll find that children go through different phases of needing more sleep, especially that morning sleep. So you'll find it especially during these developmental milestones and changes. So around 7 is a major milestone in their development. 9 is another one. And of course, puberty is a huge one where you'll find a lot of times your teenagers are sleeping in till practically the afternoon, but they really need that sleep for their growth and their development. So having a later start time for your homeschool is probably going to be a great opportunity for them to get that extra sleep that they need, provided they're not staying up until 2 in the morning. So you know best as a parent and as a teacher how to facilitate that sleep cycle for them so they have a really healthy sleep hygiene. So starting at 8 a.m. wasn't going to work for us. Starting at 9 a.m. seemed to be a good start time, but realistically, it wasn't until about 10 a.m. that I was ready to engage in that learning and that teaching. So what did we do for those hours in the morning? Other than having breakfast and doing the chores that were necessary to just start our day, my children would spend a lot of time playing. Now, this is so important for children, especially younger than puberty. So children older than puberty, we're looking at a different type of engagement when it comes to play. Play for a child who's older than puberty is completely different than a child who's younger than puberty. Younger than puberty, play is work for children. It is how they learn. It is so important for them. But let's for a moment distinguish between productive play that's good for their development and good for children versus play that is not good for their development. Now, we can argue through these as well. I'm going to give you my personal opinion based on research that I've done throughout the years, but I can totally understand if you don't adhere to these same values and principles when it comes to play. For me, play that is incredibly valuable. In fact, I would say that it's as important as food for children, as important as math for children, as important as good manners for children is open-ended play. Open-ended play with as many natural materials as possible is so important for their development. In fact, all of that brain activity that they're engaged in when they do their imaginative open-ended play actually turns into the brain development they need for critical learning later on. Now, for all of the citations for some of the studies that I'm mentioning, you can check the description box below. There are new studies being done all the time, and the things that I studied when I first started homeschooling were back in the early 2000s, which I'm sure there are even more studies to support how important open-ended play is today. And so I encourage you to check those out as well so that you feel really comfortable and confident about letting your children engage in open-ended play, even when you really want to do a math lesson. So what does open-ended play look like for us? It looks like having the children engage in an activity where there is no end purpose for it. So a board game has an end purpose for their play. When we're playing a board game, we want to get to the end, we want to win, we want to unlock all of the mysteries of that board game so that we can finish the game. Open-ended play doesn't have a finish. It is open, it is imaginative, and it is creative. So children are coming up with ideas. Now, you can certainly have a set of toys available for children so they can come up with their open-ended play, but I found, and I'm sure you have found as well, that it's usually the couch cushions that are the biggest play item in a homeschool or in a home environment. So having those materials within the home, so of course the couch cushions, blankets, sheets, dowels, blocks, pots and pans even, all of those materials are ones that the children can use to engage in open-ended play. Now, what happens if your children are bored and they don't know what to do and they're coming to you complaining and they want to be on some kind of screen time? Well, this is a great opportunity to let them figure it out on their own and not decide like, yes, we'll do screen time. And I don't want to say that you can never do screen time. I think that screen time is such an important aspect of parenting when the parent themselves need the break and offer the screen time for their child. I completely understand and sympathize when that is necessary. And I would say that be mindful of how you are using screen time with your children for your benefit, because it's definitely not for their benefit to be on the screen, even though we could argue that there can be some really amazing educational material that they could engage in while they are doing screen time. But for the most part, for children, open-ended play is going to be far more valuable than screen time. But I completely understand when a parent needs a moment and they offer screen time. So I want to separate those two things for a moment and look at screen time separately in those situations rather than as a means to alleviate boredom for a child. Now, when your children are bored, it's a great time to offer them absolutely nothing. You're going to say, that's great. Boredom is fantastic. What's going to happen when you just let them be? Well, they're going to complain, they're going to whine, and they're going to make it your problem to solve. And it's really important that in that moment, if you have the strength to do so, is to pull back and not offer suggestions and not say, fine, we'll go do this, or let's go out for a meal, or let's go out for ice cream, or let's go to the park. It's important in that actually going to the park is a really great opportunity for open-ended play if it's a park without the structure. So an open field, a place with trees, a creek bed, or the beach. Those kinds of park days are amazing for open-ended activities. But we're gonna pull back from trying to solve the problem of boredom for our children and let them discover something that's going to be engaging for them. And when we do that, something amazing happens. All parents who have waited for their children to figure out what to do have been amazed at what they come up with. This usually happens when the parent has the bandwidth to wait it out. And I completely sympathize when we as parents are so tapped out and so drained of energy that we just cannot wait it out with our children's bickering, whining, nagging to do something. So we need to also focus on ourselves so that we can have the energy in order to be the best parents that we can possibly be in the moment. And so taking care of ourselves is really important so that we can take care of our children. So throughout the day, I found that open-end play is so important for my children that I would allow their engagement in open-ended play for as long as they were engaged in that play. And we would push our homeschooling back for hours and hours and hours, because I found that to be so important and really great for their development. And that meant that our rhythm and our routine was really inconsistent. Now, I was okay with this, and you might be okay with this also, but if you're not, then I want to suggest some transition activities that can help you move from open-ended play into your homeschool day. So let's say that the children are engaged in open-ended play and it's 10 a.m. and you're really ready to start your lessons. You want about 2 hours to do your lessons before you break for lunch, but your children are really engaged in their play and you feel really guilty about pulling them away from that. Usually, I would do something that was hopefully equally as interesting for our transition activity, which usually meant it was our opening activities for our main lesson. So for our opening activities, I might do something like read a picture book or play a game or do some mental math. Mental math is not a great transition activity if they're totally engaged in play, so I would wait for that one. However, you can do active math. Active math or active arithmetic is when you're doing something that's math related, but you're engaging the child in a physical way. So they might be skipping rope and doing skip counting, or they might be tossing a beanbag back and forth where they're practicing their math facts. So these kinds of things were super engaging and often would get my children engaged in that kind of activity so that we could move them from their open-ended play into a main lesson. Now, once we're into our main lesson, we have about 2 hours of learning, and that includes our review, our active work, and our new learning. And then we can break for lunch. And for us, again, cooking and food and lunch was a really big part of our homeschool day. And so while most people may cook dinner as their main meal, I cook lunch as our main meal. So I needed time to prepare that lunch, which meant my children had more free play and more open-ended play, which is great. Now, as your children get older, they're not going to use that time for open-ended play. They can use that time to do their main lesson book work or their reading or their writing. So as the children pass puberty, they're not spending that time for their open-ended play. They're usually spending that time where I'm preparing a meal for them to do any makeup work or any written work that they weren't able to do during their main lesson block time. So then we take a nice long break for lunch. In our family, we break for a minimum of 2 hours. Practically, it's usually 3 hours, and I wouldn't even be surprised if on occasion it was 4 hours of a break. Now that seems like, where did that come from? Your school day should be winding down at around 4 o'clock. Why are you picking it up again? So we would pick up our learning in the late afternoon, early evening for 2 reasons. One is if my children had extracurricular activities, often they would be in the afternoon around that time anyway. And so at that point, we would be leaving the home for maybe it was jujitsu, maybe it's soccer, maybe it's volleyball. We would generally be leaving the home at that point to do our extracurricular activities. So you might look at that separate from your homeschool day or separate from homeschool learning, but I included that in our homeschool routine. So by the late afternoon, we were usually leaving the house or engaging in our learning again. Now this seems like, well, the students' brains are probably not really ready for that kind of learning. And yes, that is true. You really have to gauge this according to your child's abilities to engage in learning later in the evening versus first thing in the morning. Usually children are really great first thing in the morning. Around 10 to 12 is a great opportunity for that learning. But some children are just not morning children, and they are late afternoon children. Or I'm sure everyone knows the night owl. At least one family has one night owl where their active learning really turns on later on in the evening. So we would do some learning in the evening, but it really depends on what kind of learning we're trying to do. You really have to judge whether your child is ready for that active learning or more of that passive learning later in the evening. So for us, we might actually start our homeschool day much later in the evening. We would start at 4 o'clock with our opening activities, move into our main lesson, and even do maybe a science demonstration later in the evening. Now, I met one person one time, and they would do their astronomy in the winter, their astronomy at night. And so they would do specifically their new learning, their new lesson or their main lesson later on in the evening. And a lot of times those might be outdoor lessons because it was easier to see the night sky earlier on in the evening in the winter versus in the spring or the summer. And I love that idea because we tend to do our science in the spring, but this idea really took into account the seasons, and it made sense for them to do their astronomy in the winter. So I really love that idea. So there are some lessons that would work really well in the evening time. What I noticed is that reading in the evening was a perfect way to wind down our day and our homeschool activities because it was more passive, more enjoyable. It almost felt like a bedtime story. And I felt like doing those lessons in the evening were sometimes more effective than doing them earlier on in the day. Now you're wondering, where does dinner come in when you're doing a schedule like this? Our dinner is probably more reminiscent of lunchtime for other people. However, our dinner is usually leftovers from lunch, which was our main meal. So since I'm cooking a main meal for lunch, I'm also expecting that whoever's hungry later on in the day has access to that food, which I don't know about food safety, but we generally leave that food out yet covered so that people can just graze on that food for the remainder of the day. Now, if that's not going to work for your family, you can certainly put that food away, bring it out and warm it up, or you can do something entirely different for dinner if your main meal is for lunch. Some people opt for something that's a little bit faster and easier, maybe a sandwich or something that's a little bit lighter for the evening if they're doing their main meal for lunch. But for us, I would leave the food out so that they could just come and take whenever they were hungry for the remainder of the day until that food was done. So we don't do leftovers traditionally. We just do leftovers in that one day. So we don't want to put that food away and warm it up the next day. We want to cook fresh every day. And that's just something that's part of our routine and our family value, but I hope that you find something that works well for you. Now, doing a school schedule like this doesn't work for everyone. So I encourage you to observe your family first before you start on a school schedule, or start on a school schedule and then see where it's just not working, and then you can adjust so that it works for your family, so that you get a good routine and a good rhythm in where the students can expect what's going to come next and be prepared for it so that you can have the greatest success with your homeschool. I hope this helped in understanding how to make a rhythm and a routine for your homeschool. And I hope that what I shared was also helpful for you in case you feel that you don't fit the mold when it comes to starting school at 8 a.m. and doing dinner at 6 and you want to do something different. Maybe this was helpful for you. I hope that you'll check out the blog post that accompanies this video where you can find more information on Waldorf-inspired homeschooling. You can find the link to that blog post in the description box below. And if you'd like to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram and now on TikTok at Pepper and Pine.